All right. Today we're going to talk about Pierre Simon LaPlace. I don't have a very good French accent, but a French philosopher who is going to also be an astounding mathematician who will reason that we have no freedom, that there is no such thing as free will, because we live in a purely material and wholly determined reality. So that might make you a little uncomfortable. Let's go back. Let's look at the context, and then we'll get through kind of the basics of how he comes to this conclusion, get into contemplation, criticism, and contemplation as well. So Laplace is writing in the context of the post-Enlightenment period, where Newton's physics has compelled people to kind of accept that our reality, this universe, all that exists, and that's what we mean by the universe, is a rigidly determined system. That we can know, because of these physical laws, how things will behave in the future if we know certain things about those objects, right? If we have certain data, we can make predictions. This is kind of the physics you study in school, right? That we can predict the trajectory if we know, momentum and force and resistance and all of that sort of stuff, right? You probably know more than I do because you've probably studied physics more recently. So Laplace is living in this context, and he's compelled by this, just like we are today, right? We're very confident that we can make some pretty good predictions because these rules seem to always apply, right? And so this is going to really impact Laplace's thinking about the nature of reality and whether we have freedom, whether we have free will, whether we can actually make choices, or whether we live in a wholly determined reality. So a review of some terms here. First of all, there are basically two sides to this argument. There's the libertarian position and there's the determinist position. Libertarians believe that, when you're making a choice, you could have chosen otherwise. I could have chosen to not make this screencast, right? I could have chosen to do this in the Zoom. I could have chosen to not assign Laplace, right? If you believe that I could have done otherwise, then you would fall into the libertarian camp. If you don't, if you believe that this had to happen, that this was an event that had to occur because of prior events that have already been set in motion, then you are what we would call a determinist. And I like to think of this on a spectrum. So we have the spectrum of libertarian on one side, hard determinist on the other side. And in one sense, this really works, right? Because we're going to have a lot of debates about, how much free will we have, how much are we responsible for, how much are we not responsible for. Next week, we'll talk about Jean-Paul Sartre, who will talk about freedom as absolute, that we are totally responsible for everything. And that would be the far side of the libertarian position. But most people would probably argue for some sort of compatibilist position, somewhere in the middle from the two, total freedom and no freedom. People would say there are some things that we can control, and there are some things that we cannot control. There are some things that we can make choices about or could have done otherwise on, and some things that we couldn't have done otherwise on, right? And those are compatibilists. And so we'll have debates about that middle ground. But the bottom line is you're either a determinist or a libertarian. If you believe that you can ever have done otherwise, if choice is ever an option on the table, then you fall into the libertarian camp. Otherwise, you are like Laplace, a hard determinist. So let's kind of get into that a little bit more, right? So where does Laplace fit in? Well, Laplace is a hard determinist. He is assuming, for good reason, right? This isn't just like, well, I think the universe is a closed system. No, based on scientific observation and study, he has concluded, like Newton, that the universe is a closed system. And he has also concluded that Newton was right about some of these laws that the universe operates according to. And so if those two things are true, you can see the formation of a deductive argument here. If the universe is a closed system that does operate according to established rules, then how could you possibly ever have free will, right? So this is how he concludes it. And he gives a thought experiment that helps to explain it. But we know this to be true, right? If event B is caused by event A, well, then event A had to be caused by some prior event, which was caused by some prior event, which was caused by some prior event, right? And so A is not responsible for A in the moment. A is caused by some prior event. And that's kind of what Newtonian physics tells us about reality, right? Laplace uses a thought experiment that later gets named Laplace's demon, where he says, if we had the capacity, if we could somehow know the exact location and properties of every particle of matter in the universe, right? And all of the energy in the universe. We know that they all operate according to these physical laws. And therefore, not only could we know what happened prior, right? We could deduce backwards about where they had been and how they had gotten there. We could also deduce forwards and know the future, right? If your thoughts in your brain are electrical impulses and nothing more that operate according to the laws of physics, such a machine would not only be able to know what you are thinking, but it would be able to predict what you will be thinking 10 minutes from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, because remember, according to Newton, we live in a closed system that operates according to established and consistent rules. And the only problem is we don't have the data, right? We don't know where everything is and what it consists of. And two, we don't have the computational capacity, right? We can't do all of that math. So because of that, we don't and probably never will be able to predict the future. But Laplace suggests that it's not illogical, it's not logically impossible, and therefore he believes that supports his conclusion that if the universe is a closed system that does in fact operate according to established rules, then there is no such thing as free will. You are not making choices, right? The things that are happening, what feels like a choice, is not really a choice. All right. So if you have questions about that, we can discuss it further in class on Thursday. But I thought I'd help you with some criticism stuff. Hopefully, you're coming up with some ideas as you hear this that you think might be ways to challenge Laplace. We always want to look for those. You should be reading Laplace. It's a short 2-page read, 2.5-page read, starting on page 318 in your textbook, your Western philosophy textbook. So here's the typical criticisms of Laplace. And I've included some videos on this playlist that will kind of help you explore some of these criticisms. If we accept a strictly materialist Newtonian model of reality, right, if that is our metaphysical model, then this seems hard to refute. Right? But if we accept a different metaphysical model, it's possible that we could challenge Laplace's wholly determined world, right? It's not a slam dunk, but you could think of how, if you were George Berkeley or an immaterialist or a dualist, that you might say, well, there is this whole other part of reality out there, namely ideas, that do not operate, as far as we know and can tell, according to the same physical laws that particles do, that matter does, right? So that might be one way that you could challenge Laplace. The other ways here at the top, my first couple of questions here have to do with evolving science, right? And science has changed since Laplace wrote this, and there's been discoveries that are a little bit harder to explain and reconcile with the Newtonian model, namely quantum mechanics. And quantum physics seems to pose some problems for this view. So I want you to watch some of the videos that I've included on this playlist and see if you think that quantum mechanics poses a problem for Laplace. All right. Also, in addition to that, I think if you have considered yourself a materialist in our metaphysical studies, if you think that matter is the ultimate reality and there's nothing more beyond that, and you accept kind of Newtonian physics, then can you believe in anything other than a determined world? Do you have to accept it? These would be some good questions that we can discuss in more detail when we have our cohort seminars this week. All right. Okay. Then finally, some contemplation. It's at this point, I think this semester, it's a lot of fun because we get to reflect back on what we did last semester and try to now work out maybe some internal inconsistencies in our thinking. So now how do these ideas from Laplace challenge what you thought last semester about epistemology, about metaphysics, about consciousness? Do they inform your thinking? Do they change your thinking? Does your thinking from last semester inform your thinking or change your thinking about freedom and determinism? Right? So consider how what we learned last semester is impacting your thinking on this topic as well. Okay, that's it. I'll see you in class. Next class meeting for a seminar where you can ask any questions, comprehension, criticism, or contemplation. All right, I'll see you soon.